In the words of Ecclesiastes, a season is set for everything, a time for every experience under heaven, a time for dancing and a time for wailing, a time for birthing and a time for dying, a time for speaking and a time for silence, a time for seeking and a time for losing. The time of mourning is a complicated time filled with many emotions and memories, both bitter and sweet. We begin our service with the recitation of psalms and prayers, thus linking the life of Morton Stanley Greenberg, Moshe Shimon, and Chaim Feivel Verachel with the 3,000-year-old tradition of the people of Israel and the eternity of God. Psalm 23, Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai ro'i lo echzar, Binoteshe yarbitzeni al mei menuchot yinahaleni, Nafshi yeshoveh v'yanecheni v'magle tzedek lema'an shemo, Gam ki elech begetz al mavet, lo irara ki ata imadi, Shiftecha u'mishantecha hema yenachamuni, Ta'aroch lefanai shulchan neged sorarai, Dishanta v'shemen roshi kosi rivaya, Ach tov v'chesed yirdefuni kol yemei chayai, V'shavti b'veit Adonai l'orech yamim. Psalm of David. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. God makes me to lie down in green pastures and leads me beside the still waters. God restores my soul. God guides me in straight paths for God's name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You've anointed my head with oil, my cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of Adonai forever. This coming Shabbat, we will read Parshat Va'era. The narrative of Exodus continues with God reassuring Moses that God will intervene on behalf of the Israelites in Egypt, liberating them from Pharaoh with the help of Moses and his brother Aaron. The Torah then tells us that when Moses and Aaron appear before Pharaoh to make their demands, Moses was 80 years old and Aaron was 83. Can you imagine an 80-year-old man full of vitality and life, standing before an evil king and demanding the release of his people? Can you imagine that 80-year-old man never stopping, going back and forth, constantly on the move, back and forth to God as the plagues ravaged Egypt? Can you imagine that 80-year-old man leading his people on a 40-year journey to the land of Israel? Well, actually, yes. Most of us can imagine a man of 80 years, full of life, passionate about their family and their dear ones, dedicated to serving others when they need it the most. Moses may be the biblical example, but the modern example is our Mort. Morton Greenberg was a man full of life. He was fun, he was energetic, he was passionate, and he was devoted. It's no coincidence that Mort's Hebrew name was Moshe. His name was Moses. And although he did not live 120 years like the biblical Moses, he did live an incredible life in the 84 years that he had with all of you, with all of us. A life that we have come here today to remember and to honor. To help us begin the process of doing just that, I call upon three of Mort's family members who will share their reflections on his life. First, we'll hear from one of his daughters, Sherry, and then we'll hear from brother Larry, and finally from one of his grandsons, Sam. Sherry.
I'm really nervous. So I just need to say that. Before I start, I just want to thank everybody who's been so supportive to my mom, my brother, my sister, and myself, and our whole family the past couple years while my dad has he really struggled, and it was tough, and we feel the love from everybody, and we're so appreciative for all the care and all the love. So I just want to say thank you on behalf of us. And I also want to say I'm up here representing my brother and sister. They voted me the talker today, so I can do hard things wherever Marnie is. I can do them. For each of his 84 years, my dad passionately celebrated Yom Kippur. As far back as I can remember, he stayed in shul all day to participate intently in every discussion group. He fasted beyond sundown and only ate after everyone else got their share. He took very seriously the importance of being inscribed in the book of life. For the following year, he never missed a Kol Nidre service until this year. This year, fate landed him in the emergency room, and as much as he loved life and as fiercely as he clung to it, I think it would give him great comfort to know that his beliefs manifested themselves, that his passing was destiny. Also, I think he would enjoy the poetic irony that he spent this Kol Nidre in the ER, a place that had fascinated him and to which he had dedicated much of his retirement life. My dad was the best. Underneath the 84 layers of life, he was really just a kid at heart. Let me tell you a little bit about him and why he was so special. On September 1st, 1939, World War II began. And 6 weeks later, on October 25th, 1939, Morton Stanley Greenberg was born to Rose and Harold in Baltimore, the oldest of 3 boys. The U.S. joined the Allies in 1941, and it wasn't long before Papa Harold was sent off to fight for the United States in India. Because Grandma Rose was then alone with Dad and Uncle Larry, Dad became the man of the house. He had to grow up very fast, helping Grandma take care of Larry and even making the weekly bank deposits. In the years that Papa was away, little Morty became an adult. Dad was sweet and goofy and easygoing. He never took himself too seriously. He wasn't easily offended by jokes, even when he knew they were on him. If you messed up his hair, he left it that way. If you asked him to do a silly dance, he would. He earned his nickname One Funster because he was always up for a good time. This is especially evident in the 1961 American University yearbook. There's no official class picture of my dad. He didn't show up for picture day, but he is front and center in the full-page picture ad for the Zebra Room, a local AU bar. In recent years, when reflecting on his life, he acknowledged Mom's hunch that his whimsy and fun-loving nature as an adult and his ability to laugh at all things came from his natural yearning for the childhood he didn't get to fully experience as a boy. In the summer of 1948, Dad and Uncle Larry walked from their house to the Pimlico racetrack to see Citation win the Preakness on his way to the Triple Crown. Uncle Bobby was only 1 at the time, so he wasn't allowed to go. A few weeks later, Papa Harold and Grandma Rose packed up the family and they moved them to Washington, D.C. Dad attended Coolidge High School and then American University, where he met and quickly fell in love with my beautiful mom, Ellen Mae Davison. They said it was B'Sharet. They both remember seeing each other in Hughes Hall at AU one day, long before they ever met. And after being introduced later on, it was a whirlwind courtship. They were engaged after 6 months in July of 1962 and married on March 10, 1963, 60 years ago. Mom and Dad's love story, like many, is filled with laughter and tears. And above all, it's a love that survived, a love that created and nurtured and inspired Margie, Stephen, and me, a love that has given each of us incredible, fulfilling lives. Dad was voted best dressed in his class at Coolidge. Sporty Morty was a snappy dresser who took pride in looking sharp in his traditional style. His penny loafers were always shiny, and his pants were always pressed. So it was only natural that Dad would join the family clothing business at Barry's Limited after college. In 1978, he started his own business, Minuteman Press, with his childhood best buddy, Joel Katz. Dad and Joel remained faithful partners and close friends for over 30 years. I can remember the first day my dad left for work at Minuteman. I must have been around 8. I went to my window and I knocked and I waved him goodbye. And this started a daily routine. Every day when he left, whether I was in bed or not, I would run to the window and I'd wave him goodbye. I did this for years. Later, when Jay and I were getting ready to move and were in between houses, we lived with my parents for a few months. Sam and Charlie were 4 and 2 at the time. And every morning when my dad left for work, we'd all run to the bedroom window and wave him goodbye. And it gave him so much joy. Dad loved the beach. Our summer trips to Ocean City with Marcia and Larry and Jeffrey, David, and Susie were the highlight of our year. We'd spend every day on the beach, eating the BLTs and BB bats. Dad would stand guard at the water's edge, counting the heads and calling us all back when we drifted down shore. Dad was a beacon, the rock who always made sure we were safe. But he'd also ride the waves with us like a kid and let us bury him up to his ears in the sand. When I was in junior high, Mom went back to school to get her master's degree. Margie and Stephen were in high school and college then, and essentially never home. During those years, Dad and I spent a lot of time together. I was in charge of getting dinner ready for us, which is shocking to those of you who know about my cooking now. And then we would spend the evenings together. We would watch Dynasty and Cheers and Taxi and listen to Bruce Springsteen, and he'd watch me practice my palms routine over and over. He was so easygoing and up for anything. He didn't mind watching cheesy TV or listening to my music or doing the things that I like to do. He just enjoyed being there with me. Mom and Dad introduced us to all things nostalgic. They both loved the 1950s. When we got our first VCR, Dad rented a classic movie every weekend. Casablanca, Bridge on the River Kwai, North by Northwest, we saw them all. And Dad especially loved the 50s music. Recently, as his illness was overtaking him, Mom would sing him some of his favorite oldies. I'm certain that he heard them, and it warmed his heart in his final days. I didn't realize how much the music influenced me until late last year. Dad had to stop driving, but he still went to work with David and Larry at the restaurant. We'd take turns driving him home at night, and when he would get into the car, we'd turn on the 50s station, and damn if I don't know the words to almost every song. Dad was a very active congregant at B'nai Israel. He served there in many capacities under Rabbi Simon, Rabbi Schnitzer, and now Rabbi Safra. For as long as I can remember, Dad was an usher at the high holiday services, the smiling face who made sure everyone felt welcome and comfortable entering the shul that he loved. He was always in the core group of regulars at Saturday Shabbat services. Often he would show up before and after work, especially on Sunday nights, to make sure the minyan was made so the mourners could say Kaddish. Many times one of us kids would jump in the car and go with him. If you've been in shul with my dad, you'll know that Dad chanted all the prayers very loudly, and he was always slightly ahead of the rest of the congregants, and in a key that was neither consistently higher nor consistently lower than everyone else. It was just consistently different. His passion for the prayers was undeniable, but his sound wasn't so pleasing. But true to his nature, he enjoyed being ribbed for his terrible singing. I know for sure that I'm Morton Greenberg's daughter because, like Dad, I know all the words to all the songs, and I'm told by many, including my husband, who I know loves me very much, that my singing is equally as terrible. And I've heard Margie and Stephen sing too, so I'm quite certain they're also Dad's kids. Despite this, all the grandkids will tell you how Dad would sing "You Are My Sunshine" over and over when they were little. It was his favorite song. He would sing it 10 times in a row and never tire of it. And miraculously on that song, he got the melody right every time. Dad also loved to dance, but he has absolutely no rhythm. The videos from our weddings include various shots of the crowd dancing rhythmically, and then out of nowhere, this wild man comes flailing across the screen to the beat of a completely different drummer. Happy and sweaty, he didn't care that he was bobbing when the crowd was weaving. He was joyful and passionate and fun. Margie can be seen dancing in these videos too. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Dad had a lot of interesting hobbies over the years. He was an avid collector of various things, including Jewish art, baseball hats, watches, pens, jackets, clocks, and pins. He also loved working in his garden, building rock walls and nurturing his flowers. And he was a skilled leather craftsman. He leathered out our whole house in the 1970s. He made purses and hats and belts and all sorts of leather goods. He made the grandkids and several of our friends bracelets like this one, cranking them out until recently. Raise your hand if you're wearing one of Dad's bracelets today. Yeah. After retiring, Dad was a passionate volunteer for many years in the emergency room at Suburban Hospital. I've heard from so many of you over the past few days who crossed paths with him while he thought he was running the whole emergency room. He was incredibly proud to receive special recognition for serving over 6,000 hours there. He loved being in the ER in the middle of the chaos. He had a warm smile and provided comfort to those waiting to be seen. He was fascinated with the police, fire, and rescue squads. He always had the latest scanner so he could keep tabs on the emergency channels and follow along with the rescues. When we were little, he would sometimes throw us in the Jeep and chase the fire engines to the scene. Dad also put his passion for police, fire, and rescue to good use, volunteering for the Montgomery County Rescue Squad and police forces. He especially enjoyed participating in emergency reenactments to help train the first responders. He even convinced Stephen to volunteer with him. We remember seeing them come over together looking like they'd been in a car wreck, because they'd actually been actors in a staged car wreck, full makeup and all. It was so exciting for Dad to be part of the action, and it brought him great joy to give back to the community this way. But more than being a snazzy dresser or volunteer of the year, Dad was a family man. He was extremely close and dedicated to his dear parents, Grandma Rose and Papa Harold. He and Larry and Bobby doted on them and cared for them when they got older. He was also very close with his brothers. The 3 boys were best friends. They'd spend hours on the phone talking over and over, never tiring of each other. Dad was a loving and adoring husband to Mom for over 60 years. He was present and caring to Margie, Stephen, and me, and welcoming to Jim, Suzanne, and Jay. He adored each of his 10 grandkids, Matthew, and Brandon, and Maxie, I don't know where Maxie is, and Maxie, and Sammy, and Allison, and Charlie, and Maddie, and Molly, and Ryan, and Emily. He'd often look at us all gathered and say in amazement, "From 2 people came all this." On the eve of their 60th anniversary, Mom and Dad welcomed their first great-grandson, Lucas. Dad felt tremendous joy holding baby Lucas and singing "You Are My Sunshine" to him. He gave him his first pair of Levi's, just like he did for all the other grandkids. At his bris, Lucas wore the same bris dress that every boy in the family has worn, from Dad, Larry, and Bobby, to Jeffrey, Stephen, and David, to all 6 grandsons, and now to Lucas. It has been passed on now to a fourth generation, and Dad was the first to wear it in 1939. I'd like to close by sharing a quote that Dad loved and kept in a frame on his wall. 100 years from now, it will not matter what my bank account was, the sort of house I lived in, or the kind of car I drove, but the world may be different because I was important in the life of a child. Dad, you were adored by everyone who knew you, especially all of us. We won the lottery in family love. You did make a difference. We love you and the life you shared with us for 84 years. So rest in peace, sweet Dad. Your memory is now our blessing.
Larry. Sherry, that was beautiful. What you said really was moving. It's wonderful to hear. I just want to mention a couple things about Morton. He was my brother, and he was my best friend from little up. When we were little, my dad was, Sherry had mentioned, he was in the service for about 3 years after I was born. But Morton was there. He took us downtown to the movies. He did the things we needed to do and made sure we had the opportunity to do everything that was important to us and make sure that we were family friends with the family. We went down, as I mentioned, we went downtown to the movies, and it was difficult because we had to take Bobby to it. He was only about 2 years old at the time, but we were able to do it, and he didn't mind. And on the social point at home, we always played baseball and other sports together. That's what we did. If I played, he was with me. He played with me. We used to watch TV together. And of course, in the beginning, we didn't have TV, but once we did, we listened to baseball games then on the radio, and it was really interesting. We'd go up at 8 o'clock at night and listen to the Washington Senators games, and really enjoyed doing that. There was a lot of other radio shows at that time. We listened to The Lone Ranger, Roy Rogers, Baby Snooks, Gene Autry. And he was older, but he was always included me in everything that he did. I always followed Mort's footsteps. When we were at junior high and high school, he joined the fraternity. And so when I got of age, I joined the same fraternity as he was a member of, and certainly became very, very good friends with many of his personal friends. And nice to see, of course, Joel Katz, who passed away, is not here, but Bill Blanken and some other friends as well. I see Jerry Ginsburg there as well. So there's a lot of people he grew up with and he was friendly with. One of the things that was just mentioned, and I was so proud of him, he was voted the best dressed kid in high school. And he loved that. He loved the opportunity because he got the clothes that our fathers, and of course we worked there too in the business, and we loved that. Even our local team in those days was the Washington Senators, and if you remember back then, Washington's baseball team was first in war, first in peace, and last in the American League. But it didn't bother us. We were still fans of theirs, and we watched the games together. Actually, Morton not only worked, or I should say, not only did he watch the game, but he also worked at the concession stand at the Washington games. And he did that for a few years and really loved it, and he came home with things that he had gotten and so forth. It was just wonderful. When Mort married Ellen, and I married Marcia, we became even closer, if it's possible, what we did. For years, we were inseparable. We spent weekends together, barbecues, house vacations, Ocean City, celebrations and holidays together.
And one holiday we never missed, we went every year out together on New Year's Eve. That was our big thing, that we do that year after year. As we got older, every Saturday, Morton, without love, would make a phone call to both me and Bobby, and my mother would get on the call too quite often, and we would talk about our stories and everything we could discuss. It became a joke between Ellen and Marcia, and they talked about us like we were yentas, talking about all the things that went on. I'll get it in a second. It's not easy doing this, and I know Sherry did a beautiful job. I'm trying to equal, but I don't think I'm as good as she is. In our most recent years, I got the opportunity to work with Morton. And I think this is important. While he was sick and towards the end, and I would pick him up and we'd come to work. It was an opportunity for us to hang out with and even get closer as we worked together. At the restaurant, he made us all laugh. Gabby, Daniela, Josue, John, they're all here today. That's the relationship that he had with them. And he never minded, and they didn't mind getting him his coffee, remember? And get his, and also, for everybody who knew Morton well, the cell phone was not easy for him to work, but he did come to them constantly and give the help, and they're doing their work. Oh, can you fix my cell phone? But it was fun, and he loved it, and everything worked out well. I just want to tell you and finish up by saying I was the lucky one to have him as my brother. And I was lucky one to have Ellen as my sister-in-law with Marcia and the four of us. Everything we did, pretty much, whether it was New Year's Eve or whatever it was, we did it together. And we certainly loved being with them, and that was an important part of our life, and very, very important. And thank you for everybody coming and thinking about Morton. He was the best. He was my brother from the beginning until the day he passed away. Thank you all very much.
How many years, How many years?
How many years did you know him?
Oh, I knew him. I was born 3 years after he was. He lived to 81. I think that gives me, right, 3 years. So that was it. And we were close all that time. It never mattered. Thank you very much.
Enough said. Can everyone hear me okay? On behalf of all 10 of his grandchildren, I'm here to share some thoughts to celebrate Grandpa. It's a somber day, and he didn't care for the attention, but Grandpa would be proud to know that he brought us all together, especially his family. Every single time I talked to Grandpa, he would tell me how proud he was to have raised a family that gets along and enjoys each other. He would always say, "We have something unique. We can all be in the same room together. We all talk, we're all civil, and not everybody has that, and I'm lucky to have that." Grandpa loved the holidays because they were an excuse to have the family together. He loved our annual summer trips to the beach, he loved our annual white elephant game, and he loved having a sleepover when we were little. Listening to the police scanners, watching Taxi and the Little Rascals, showing us our first rated R movie, even without Mima's approval, Stripes with Bill Murray, or goofing off with us in the backyard. My mom mentioned that we're all wearing the bracelets that he made for us. All the grandsons are also wearing one of his ties. Nice touch. Even if he wasn't in the room, Grandpa loved that the family was together. And while he couldn't come to Mexico for Matt and Rachel's wedding, he was ecstatic to hear that all the cousins bonded and had such a good time together as a family. He would have loved the last few days, everyone hanging out and looking at pictures and reminiscing about old times. Grandpa was the life of the party.
Enthusiastic, energetic, and always down to have a good time. Charlie said the other day, he was so fun. He used to tell me, you only go around one time in life. There's no dress rehearsal. And he lived that way, singing and dancing, or loudly getting involved in whatever game was being played. The games were fun, but as my mom just mentioned, the Greenbergs aren't known for singing and dancing. So Grandpa would sometimes look or sound silly, and he didn't care. I remember when we all went to the iFly indoor skydiving a few years ago, and Grandpa was making us laugh trying to get the suit and helmet and goggles on. There were little stray earplugs flying everywhere, and he couldn't get the helmet on the right way. It was a mess, and it was hilarious. Part of it was that he was doing it on purpose to make us laugh, and part of it was that he was a Viltachaya. But Grandpa knew that he could lean into it and laugh with us, even if it was at his own expense. There are plenty of other fun stories like this. Max and Molly were telling me yesterday about when Grandpa brought cotton candy into Stephen's convertible, and Stephen kept saying, don't eat the cotton candy in the car, and Grandpa ate the cotton candy in the car, and a few minutes later he wound up shirtless in the Greenberg's kitchen covered in powdered sugar. And when something like this would happen, he'd get this wry smile on his face and play dumb, and he'd say, hey guy, what's all the big fuss about? And he'd laugh with us. He taught us not to take ourselves too seriously, and that it's okay to laugh at ourselves. We've all done some embarrassing things in our lives. One time in college, I slipped and fell into the Amsterdam Canal in front of a bunch of my friends, and I called my mom in tears. And she said I could have the rest of the day to pout and be upset, but tomorrow I needed to get over it. You've got to be able to laugh at yourself. Think about Grandpa. When he does something silly, he laughs because he knows it's funny. And if you can't laugh at yourself, then everybody else is just laughing at you. I think about that all the time, especially on a day like today. Just like Grandpa, we've got to laugh during the tough times because life is fun and weird, and you've just got to enjoy it. There is no dress rehearsal. You only go around one time. So let's all live our lives like Grandpa did, smiling and laughing and enjoying the bumpy roads that lead to beautiful places. We love you, Guy.
Thank you to Sherry and Larry and Sam for beautiful remarks, reflections on Mort's life. Morton Stanley Greenberg, as we heard, was born on October 29th of 1939 to the late Rose and Harold Greenberg, Sinai Hospital in Baltimore. The world was a very different place in 1939. It was the year that The Wizard of Oz premiered. FDR was serving his second term as President of the United States, and World War II was beginning to rage in Europe, but in Baltimore, Harold and Rose, high school sweethearts, were starting a family of their own. First came our Mort, followed years later by younger brothers, Larry and then Bobby. And we heard about Mort in his earliest years, thrust into a world where he had to take on significant responsibility as the eldest brother and upholding that commitment for the entirety of his life. The Greenberg family relocated from Baltimore to Washington in August of '48. Mort celebrated his bar mitzvah on November 1st, 1952 at Beth Shalom congregation in D.C. And at Calvin Coolidge High School, Mort was active in his fraternity, Sigma Phi, and he paved the way for his younger brother Larry to join years later too. And as we heard, the Greenberg boys had a special relationship with one another. Mort and Larry were especially close for their entire lives. We heard from Sherry about Mort and Ellen's brief courtship and their marriage in 1963. They settled in Silver Spring, where they raised this beautiful family, and from these two came many, with children and children-in-law Margie and Jim, Stephen and Suzanne, Sherry and Jay, and 10 grandchildren, plus a granddaughter-in-law, and now a great-grandson, Lucas. In these past few difficult weeks, it was pictures and videos of Lucas that made Mort smile. Ellen remarked to me that being married to Mort, you never knew what was going to happen. Together they had their share of laughs and fun. But also, Mort knew when to be serious. Everyone knows that he was serious about his clothing. He was serious about supporting his family, working diligently to provide for them over the years, from clothing businesses in D.C. to the printing business in Bethesda. Mort was serious about his Jewishness. We heard from Sherry about his devotion to synagogue life. Mort and Larry were dedicated to reciting Mourner's Kaddish at the Daily Minyan for the 11 months after both of their parents passed. And Mort did the same thing during COVID after Bobby passed away. He was typically one of the very first people to sign on to our Zoom Minyan at B'nai Israel just before 7:15 in the morning, and he would take the time to greet everyone else and check in on them. Mort was a second-generation member of B'nai Israel, and today in this room we have the fourth generation of the B'nai Israel family from the Greenbergs. And others in the family followed Mort's example of being dedicated to the synagogue. Ellen served as the founding chair of Mitzvah Day, and Suzanne worked for the nursery school many years ago. And the Greenbergs built relationships with their clergy, and all of us at B'nai Israel deeply appreciate your family's dedication to our congregation for all of these years. Mort and Ellen raised their family in Silver Spring and then later in Rockville on Clavel Terrace, just a few miles from here. And as I mentioned earlier, Mort was always on the move. He loved his tractor, he loved his Jeep, his motorcycle, his Cutlass 442. We heard about his scanners and how he was known to follow a fire engine when he saw the sirens blaring. So perhaps it comes as no surprise that later in life he wanted to serve on the rescue squad, but they were interested in, well, younger candidates. Instead, Mort found something else to do, and he served for many years as a volunteer greeter at Suburban Hospital's emergency room, making lasting impressions on patients, family members, and hospital staff. Mort was thrilled when his grandchildren would stop by to say hello so he could introduce them to the hospital staff and kvel about them and their accomplishments. It was not unusual for a patient or hospital staff member to recognize Mort in public and go over to say hello, thanking him for his attentive care and friendly disposition at their time of need. One of our members at B'nai Israel even wrote to me upon hearing of Mort's passing to tell me that they remembered a time when they had to bring their mother to the hospital, and it was Mort's friendly face that greeted them at the door, reassuring them and comforting them during a difficult time. Mort only stopped volunteering when the hospital stopped accepting volunteers at the start of the pandemic, and he had even tried to get back involved in the past couple of years because Mort lived to serve and to take care of others. It's no surprise that we have heard and we have seen that the Greenberg family is so close with one another because Mort set the example. We heard about when conference calling was first introduced, Mort would spend hours on the phone with his mother, Grandma Rose, and his brother, Larry and Bobby. They had a very unique and special relationship, and this was the incredible example that he provided for his children and for his grandchildren to follow. Mort's family members remember him as a truly fun father and grandfather. He loved to joke around. He loved to volunteer and to serve. He loved to spend time with grandchildren from the very time that they were born and throughout the years of their lives together. He had a baseball hat for each college that they attended. Of course, it had to be perfectly shaped and sit properly atop his head. He called to check on the grandkids whenever they were sick, often multiple times a day, and if he could, he'd even go with them to their doctor's appointments because that's the kind of devoted grandfather that he was. Today they reflect back their love for Mort when all 10 grandchildren will step forward as pallbearers to accompany Mort to his final resting place. Beyond his family, it was the simple things in life that brought pleasure and joy to Mort. He never turned down a kosher hot dog and a soda, which he ate with characteristic Greenberg alacrity for eating. He enjoyed gardening, and he loved to sit outside and enjoy the wind chimes. He loved to watch the news, Jeopardy, rom-coms, and whatever his granddaughters happened to be watching. He loved a good cocktail. He loved a hot cup of coffee and a glazed donut from Dunkin'. And he would have loved to be here today with all of you, surrounded by family and friends who knew him, who couldn't say enough about how much they loved him. This is the life that Mort and Ellen built together. This is the legacy of Mort Greenberg. When Jewish people take leave of this world, We say Tihyeh Nishmato Tzrura B'Tzorah Chayim. May their soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. And when we say this, we mean different things, but for Mort, we pray that his indelible legacy be a source of inspiration for Ellen, for Larry, for his children, for his grandchildren, and for his great-grandson. We pray that they be reminded throughout their life of Mort's greatest attributes, his devotion to family, his tireless efforts to serve the needs of others throughout his life, and his joyous approach to living, and that these attributes will animate their lives for many years to come. May the memory of Morton Stanley Greenberg, Moshe Shimon Ben Chaim Feivel V'Rachel be a blessing for us all. I invite everyone to please rise for the memorial prayer. Elo aslichot chanun v'rachuvum, erech apayim v'rav chesed, hamitzei chaparap hashem v'hakravat yasham, nucha hanechona, tachat kanfei hashechinah, v'ma'alohot kiddushim otohorihim, kizohar harakia mazahirihim, et nishmahat Moshe Shimon, ben Chaim Feivel v'Rachel, shalach le'olamacho. Ana ba'al harachamihim, zachar lo l'tova kol zichuyotav v'tzidkotav, v'artzot achayihim, uftach lo sharei tzedek ve'oraha, sharei chemla v'chaninaha, v'seter kanafecha, hastirehu le'olamihim, utzrohor b'tzrach chayim et nishmatoho, Adonai hu nachlatoho, v'yanuach v'shalom amishkavaho, v'nomahar. Amen. Eloah Slichot, God of forgiveness, you who are gracious and compassionate, patient and abundantly kind, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure to the soul of Morton Stanley Greenberg, Moshe Shimon Ben Chaim Feivel V'Rachel, who has gone to his eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that you remember all the worthy and righteous deeds he performed. May our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life. May he rest in peace. And we say, Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, at this time we will be proceeding to the grave area, which is here, of course, on the grounds of Judean Memorial Gardens. Those of you who are able to stay and join us, after we bring Mr. Greenberg out, please return to your cars. We are not going in formal processions. The cemetery is not so large that you won't see exactly where the hearse is going. You can follow along in your car. You may also choose to walk, but if you do choose to walk, please remember, you have to walk back. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, would all the pallbearers please come forward at this time?
V'seter kanafecha, hastirehu le'olamihim, utzrohor b'tzrach chayim et nishmatoho, Adonai hu nachlatoho, v'yanuach v'shalom amishkavaho, v'nomahar. Amen. V'laslichot, God of forgiveness, you who are gracious and compassionate, patient and abundantly kind, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure to the soul of Morton Stanley Greenberg, Moshe Shimon Ben Chaim Feivel Rachel, who has gone to his eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that you remember all the worthy and righteous deeds he performed. May our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life. May he rest in peace. And we say, Amen.